He got the call at 2 a.m. It wasn't meant for him, but he showed up anyway. No one expected that choice to lead him to a quiet house in the woods, to a child hiding behind the curtains, and to a woman whose eyes carried more grief than words ever could. If you still believe in second chances, if you've ever wondered whether a broken heart can love again, then this story is for you. Like and subscribe, because some journeys don't begin with hope. They begin with a knock on the wrong door. In the middle of the rain. The rain had been falling for hours. Not the kind that danced playfully on rooftops, but the slow, cold kind that seemed to soak through bone and memory alike. Wind hissed through the pine trees around the cabin, rattling the windows like some old ghost asking to be let in. Daniel sat alone in the kitchen, hunched at the small table he'd built a decade ago, with hands that used to feel stronger. The kettle on the stove had long gone quiet, steam reduced to a ghostly wisp. In front of him sat a chipped mug of tea untouched. Across the table, a picture frame leaned against the salt shaker. Her face smiled back at him. Still young, still glowing, still here somehow. He didn't touch it. The fire crackled low behind him, casting long, flickering shadows that made the cabin feel too big and too small all at once. Outside, the downpour softened the edges of the night. No visitors, no traffic. Just the woods. Just the storm. Just him. Then the phone rang, a harsh, sudden sound that didn't belong in the stillness. Daniel flinched. He stared at the screen. Unknown number. 2:03 a.m. He almost let it go. He never answered calls from strangers. Not anymore. Not since the night everything came undone. But something. It wasn't curiosity, more like instinct or maybe just habit, made him press accept. Hello? His voice was low, hoarse. Silence. Then a voice, soft, trembling, barely louder, than the rain. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you. I think I dialed the wrong number. I was trying to reach a tow truck. My phone's wet. My daughter's sick and The line crackled. Daniel sat up straighter. Where are you? He asked. A gas station just off County Line Road. It's closed. We were trying to drive out, but the car died. I didn't know who else to call. She sounded young, but not fragile. Tired, desperate, careful. The way people sound when they've been strong too long. Daniel looked out the window. The rain was thicker now, pooling in the dirt driveway, tapping hard on the metal roof. He could hang up. Say it wasn't his problem. That used to be easy. But not tonight. Stay there, he said quietly. I'm on my way. The old pickup groaned in protest as he started it, headlights cutting through the night like tired eyes. Daniel hadn't driven far in months. Not since the accident. Not since the aftermath. He kept his hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning the road as it curved through familiar woods. Every pine tree looked like a shadow of the past. Every bend reminded him what he'd lost. 10 minutes later, the station's sign emerged through the storm, a dim red glow barely visible in the downpour. Under the awning stood a woman, soaked to the knees, holding a bundled child against her chest. Her coat clung to her like a second skin. Her face was turned downward, eyes flicking up only when his truck stopped in front of her. Daniel stepped out into the rain. Their eyes met. I'm Daniel, he said. I'm Lily, she replied, her voice steady despite her shaking. This is Sophie. The little girl's face was flushed, curls plastered to her forehead, tiny fingers twitching in fevered sleep. She needs a doctor, Lily said. I'll find one. Please, can we just get warm for a bit? Daniel nodded. Get in. No. Questions. Not yet. No judgment. Just the storm and two strangers with nothing to give but a few dry blankets and silence. The truck's heater wheezed as Daniel drove. Lily sat clutching Sophie, rubbing her back in slow, tired circles. The child coughed once, a small sound that seemed to pierce right through him. You're not from around here, he said quietly. No, Lily answered. Just passing through. Didn't expect the storm. Daniel glanced sideways. She was younger than he'd guessed, late 20s maybe, but her eyes were older, worn. They said nothing else for the rest of the drive. When they pulled into his drive, the cabin looked like something out of time, half swallowed by trees and fog, with its porch light flickering like a heartbeat. The wind caught the chimes under the eaves and scattered their notes into the dark. Daniel opened the door and stepped aside. Lily hesitated, then followed. Inside, the warmth was like a memory. She laid Sophie on the couch nearest the fire. Daniel handed her a dry blanket, then moved to the stove, filling the kettle again. His movements were practiced, quiet, a kind of language between men who had lost too much and women who had learned not to ask for anything. "Thank you," Lily said softly. He nodded, not turning. Sophie stirred in her sleep. Lily leaned down, kissed her forehead, then sat back and let out a breath she'd been holding for miles. Daniel watched from the corner of his eye. This wasn't what he'd planned. He didn't know what he'd just let into his home. But somehow it didn't feel wrong. He looked out at the rain still falling past the window, tapping on the roof like it always had. Maybe this was just one night. Maybe it would pass like the storm. But then again, maybe not. Sometimes the storm brings more than rain. Sometimes it brings someone who reminds you why you ever opened the door at all. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The fire in the living room burned low, casting soft amber light across the worn floorboards. Sophie lay on the couch, her small chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Lily sat close by, one hand on her daughter's back, the other cupped around a mug of warm water Daniel had handed her hours ago. He lingered in the hallway, out of sight but listening. His cabin had never felt crowded before. Now it held too many heartbeats. He had left the door to the guest room open, fresh sheets draped over the bed, but Lily hadn't moved from her spot. She hadn't asked for more. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes closed. He could still hear her voice on the phone, frantic, fragile. The way she'd said, "I didn't know who else to call." He'd heard those words before, years ago, from a nurse. They had come wrapped in a different tone, a different grief, but they hit the same nerve. He exhaled and moved to the kitchen, careful with his steps. The kettle was cold. He turned the burner on, then sat at the same table where he had spent countless nights alone, staring at nothing. Except tonight he wasn't alone. Morning came gray and silent. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wet hush that clung to the trees. Mist curled through the yard, rising from the earth like forgotten breath. Daniel brewed fresh coffee. The smell filled the cabin like a promise. Lily stirred first. Her hair was tangled, dark circles under her eyes. She didn't look like someone used to asking for help. "Coffee?" he asked. She blinked at him, as if uncertain where she was for a second, then nodded. "Yes, thank you." Sophie was still asleep. The fever had broken sometime in the night. Lily reached over and touched her forehead gently, then sat at the table, hands wrapped around the steaming mug. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Daniel wasn't good with words, not since he lost his wife, but silence, he'd learned, could be its own kind of conversation. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry for just showing up like that." "You didn't," he replied. "You called the wrong number," I answered. She looked down, a small, tired laugh escaping her lips. "Right. Where were you headed?" he asked. "Anywhere else?" she said. Daniel nodded. That was an answer he understood. Later, Lily stood on the porch looking out over the clearing. Her jacket hung loosely on her frame, too thin for the cold. Daniel brought her a thicker coat from the closet, a quilted one his wife had once worn. She hesitated, before slipping it on. "Thank you." "Sophie can stay on the couch," he said, standing in the doorway. "There's no rush." "I can't pay you," she said quietly. "I'm not asking." Lily turned to face him. "Why are you helping us?" Daniel looked past her out at the trees. The rain had left everything clean, if not new. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because I didn't last time. It hung there between them, unexplained but understood. Lily didn't ask more. That afternoon he chopped wood out back. He didn't offer Lily to help, and she didn't insist. But she did bring him water, and she refolded the towels he left in a basket by the fire. Small things, quiet things. Inside, Sophie had woken up. Her voice was hoarse, but her eyes were brighter. She curled up with an old blanket on the rug and watched the fire with fascination. "She likes it here," Lily said softly as Daniel stepped inside, wiping his hands on a towel. "It's warm," he answered. "And quiet." Daniel shrugged. "Sometimes too quiet." She studied him for a moment, then said, "You built this place?" "Mostly." "With your wife?" He didn't answer. Lily nodded as if she understood anyway. "She's gone?" 6 years. I'm sorry." "So am I." That evening, they ate soup Lily had made from what she found in the pantry. She apologized for the simplicity, but Daniel told her it was the first hot meal he hadn't made himself in a long time. After Sophie was asleep again, Lily lingered in the doorway to the guest room. "Are you sure?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "The bed's yours. The door doesn't latch well, but it stays closed if you put the chair in front of it." She smiled faintly. "I don't think we're in danger tonight." He didn't correct her. When the house was dark, Daniel sat by the fire, staring into the coals. The door to the guest room didn't close all the way. A thin line of light spilled onto the floor. He could hear her breathing, soft, steady. He knew they couldn't stay. But he also knew something else. When a door doesn't close, sometimes it's not a flaw. Sometimes it's a sign. Some doors are meant to stay ajar, just wide enough to let the right people in. By morning, the cabin no longer felt like it belonged to just one man. Daniel woke to the smell of something warm and faintly sweet. Oatmeal maybe, with cinnamon. Not a smell he'd made for himself in years. The fire had gone out sometime before dawn, but the chill in the room didn't reach his bones like it used to. He pulled on his flannel shirt and moved into the kitchen. Lily stood by the stove. Her back was straight, her shoulders slightly hunched as if still deciding whether to stay or run. Sophie sat at the table, propped up on a pillow, spooning oatmeal into her mouth with careful, sleepy precision. Daniel blinked. For a moment, the scene looked too normal. "Hope you don't mind," Lily said without turning. "I found oats and apples in the pantry." "You cook?" he asked. She gave a small shrug. "Used to. Not much lately." Sophie looked up and gave him a quiet, crooked smile. "Hi," Daniel nodded. "Morning." There were only 2 bowls. Lily hadn't made any for herself. Daniel opened a drawer, pulled out a 3rd spoon, and set it beside her hand. "You're not invisible," he said. She paused, then gave the faintest nod, like someone remembering how to accept kindness. After breakfast, Sophie wandered toward the living room, dragging the old plaid blanket with her. She climbed into the armchair near the window and sat like a cat watching the rain-muddied trees sway in the wind. "She seems better," Daniel said. Lily stirred her tea. "Her fever's down. No more coughing, just tired." "How long were you driving?" "Too long." She didn't elaborate. He didn't press. Silence hung between them again, comfortable almost. Daniel had lived so long with no voices, but his own memories, that hearing hers didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt like company. He glanced at the window. "You're safe here, if that's what you're wondering." Lily looked up. "That obvious?" "I know what people look like when they're afraid of being found." She didn't ask how. They spent the day like strangers, figuring out how to share a space. Not intruding, not assuming. A quiet dance around rooms, doors, silence. Lily washed the mugs and cleaned the counters. Sophie helped stack kindling by the hearth. Daniel fixed a loose board on the porch. He caught them whispering together once, mother and daughter, curled under a blanket in the reading nook. Sophie giggled at something Lily said, and the sound, light and clear, hit him like a warm wind through the cabin walls. That night it snowed lightly. Just a dusting, but enough to paint the roof silver. After dinner, another simple meal Lily insisted on cooking. Sophie asked if she could stay up a little longer. Daniel nodded. Just a little. They sat near the fire, Sophie curled up between them on the rug, wrapped in that same blanket. She looked from one adult to the other, then said, "Is this your house, Mr. Daniel?" "It is," he answered. "Did you build it all by yourself?" "I had help," he said, glancing at the mantel where his wife's photo still sat. Lily followed his eyes. Said nothing. Sophie tilted her head. "Can me and Mommy help now?" Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. Lily reached out and gently touched her daughter's hand. "He's already helping us, sweetie." The child nodded, satisfied, but Daniel felt something shift, a wordless weight. He wasn't sure what scared him more, how easy it was to picture them staying, or how much he wanted to. Later, when the fire was dying and Sophie had been carried to bed, Lily stood near the window watching snow fall beneath the porch light. Daniel stepped into the room, drying his hands. "She asked me yesterday," Lily said, voice low, "if this was what a real home felt like." He said nothing. I told her it wasn't ours. Still, she didn't turn. But she said it felt like one anyway. Daniel walked past her to the old coat rack near the door. He touched his wife's scarf, still hanging there, then let his hand fall. "I know you can't stay forever," he said. "But for now, you can stay." She turned slowly, eyes soft but unreadable. "For now," she echoed. He nodded. That was all either of them could promise. But in that moment, in the quiet of the snow under the low beams of a stranger's cabin, three broken people had made something that looked, for all the world, like a shelter. Sometimes, home isn't a place you find. It's a place you build with the strangers who choose to stay. The next morning was brittle with cold. Frost edged the windows, the kind that etched delicate white veins like winter's own handwriting. Daniel stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the bare trees, a mug of black coffee warming his hands. Behind him, Lily moved quietly, folding Sophie's pajamas and setting them by the fire. The child still slept on the couch, breathing evenly, a little pink back in her cheeks. Daniel hadn't asked them how long they planned to stay. He told himself it was because he didn't want to pressure them, but deep down he wasn't sure he wanted them to leave. "Do you ever talk to her?" Lily's voice broke the morning stillness. He turned. "Who?" She nodded toward the photo, above the mantel. "Your wife." Daniel looked at the frame, then back at his mug. "Sometimes. What do you say?" He didn't answer right away. "Depends on the day. Some days I apologize. Some days I try to remember what her laugh sounded like." Lily nodded like she understood. Then she said, "Do you want to know what broke me?" Daniel didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. Lily sat down at the table. Her eyes were calm. Too calm. "I married a man who looked perfect on paper, charismatic, charming, never raised his voice in front of company." She rubbed a thumb over the rim of her mug. "But behind closed doors, he taught me that silence was safer than speaking." Daniel stayed quiet. "I didn't leave the first time, or the second. I thought it was my fault, that I just wasn't enough, that if I tried harder, smiled more, things would change." She gave a bitter smile. "They didn't." Daniel's grip on his mug tightened. "I got pregnant. That made things worse. More control, more fear. But Sophie, she was the one thing that didn't hurt to love." Her voice cracked. "I left. The night he hit her." Daniel's jaw tensed. "I had nowhere to go," Lily said. "No one left who'd pick up the phone." Her eyes met his. "Until you." Daniel exhaled through his nose, sat across from her, and said quietly, "I didn't save you." "No," she said. "You just answered. That was enough." The fire crackled softly as Sophie stirred awake, mumbling sleepily. Lily rose to check on her, brushing damp curls from the child's forehead. Her movements were gentle but sure, Like someone who'd had to learn tenderness the hard way. Daniel stayed at the table, hand still wrapped around the mug. When Lily returned, she didn't sit. She looked out the window. What happened to her? My wife? Daniel asked. She nodded. Daniel stared into the fire. House fire. 6 years ago, we were remodeling a room. Electrical wiring gave out. His voice was flat, measured. She got trapped. Lily turned, her eyes widened. You... I tried. I got burned pulling her halfway out. Then the beam fell. He rolled back the sleeve of his flannel shirt. Angry scars covered most of his forearm. Lily inhaled sharply. Everyone said, I was a hero, he said, but all I remember is failing. Silence fell between them again, but now it was different, not awkward. Not empty, just two broken people sitting with their wreckage, finally not alone in it. Later that day, Daniel walked out to the shed behind the house. Sophie followed him, skipping steps through the frost-crusted leaves, her hands shoved in two big gloves Lily had sewn together from old ones in the coat bin. What's in there? She asked, eyes bright. Tools, Daniel said. Wood, nails, some old furniture I keep meaning to fix. She peered through the cracked wooden door like it was the entrance to a treasure cave. Can I see? He hesitated, then pushed the door open. The smell of cedar, sawdust, and age filled the air. Old chairs stacked in corners. A cracked tabletop on two sawhorses. Weathered tools on a pegboard. Did you make this? She asked, pointing at a carved bench. Yeah. Long time ago. She ran her hand along the grain. It's pretty. You could make a new one. Daniel smiled a little. Maybe. That night, Lily found him in the shed. She leaned on the doorframe, watching him sand down a broken table leg. She likes being around you, she said. Daniel looked up, brushing dust off his hands. She's a good kid. She hasn't had many good people around. He didn't reply. She asked me today if we could plant a tree out front. Daniel paused. She said she wanted to watch it grow. Just like our safe place, she called it. He swallowed. You can plant whatever you want. Lily stepped closer. You don't have to fix us. I'm not trying to, he said. I just don't want to be the reason you break again. Lily's eyes filled with something soft and raw. Then don't close the door. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. I won't. Some wounds don't need to be healed all at once. They just need a place quiet enough to breathe. There are kinds of silence that speak of loss, and then there are kinds that feel like healing. For 3 days, the cabin lived in the second kind. Morning started with soft footsteps on wooden floors, the gentle clink of mugs, and the sound of Lily humming as she tied Sophie's hair with mismatched ribbons. Daniel noticed he didn't dread getting out of bed anymore. The rhythm was simple. They shared meals, chopped wood, took walks to the edge of the frozen creek. Sophie collected leaves and pebbles and gave them names. Hope, Gentle, Sky, little things that made Lily smile and Daniel wonder when the last time he'd smiled without guilt was. On the fourth morning, Sophie ran into the kitchen, holding something in her tiny hand. A seed, she said, beaming. Daniel looked up from the wood he was stacking by the stove. Where'd you find it? By the porch. Mommy says we can plant it near the window. Daniel glanced at Lily, who had paused mid-stir with the oatmeal. She met his eyes. We won't be here forever. But something might. He looked down at Sophie's small fingers cradling the seed, then back to Lily. All right, he said, let's find it a home. They planted the seed beneath the big window facing east. The soil was still cold, and Daniel knew it might not take. But Sophie talked to it like it would. She knelt beside the small patch of earth, hands pressed, together in prayer or promise, whispering, Grow strong. We'll come back and visit. Daniel stood nearby, arms crossed against the chill. Lily beside him, hands in her coat pockets, watching Sophie with that kind of heartbreak only mothers carry, loving something so fiercely while preparing to let it go. She's tough, Daniel said. She had to be. Lily replied. It's not something I'm proud of. Daniel nodded. Neither is mine. That afternoon, Daniel and Lily fixed the broken hinge on the back door. She held the frame steady while he drilled the screws, both of them kneeling in the cold, laughing once. When he dropped the screwdriver and it bounced into the snow, "You used to do this kind of thing together?" she asked. He nodded. Emily, my wife, loved working with her hands. She'd rather rebuild a bookshelf than buy a new one. Lily smiled. I like that. He looked at her. You're good at this. I used to help my father with his tools before he passed. They fell quiet again, but not out of discomfort. Some silences are just full. That evening, Daniel brought down a box from the attic. Photo albums, old tools, half-finished carvings, things he hadn't touched since the fire. He set them on the kitchen table and opened one album slowly, his hands unsure. Lily sat across from him. Sophie had gone to bed early, tired from her adventures in the frost. She was beautiful, Lily said, running her finger gently over a picture. Yeah, Daniel replied, voice low. She really was. They didn't say much more, just turned pages, shared memory like borrowed time. Daniel caught Lily glancing at him, not with pity, not with need, just seeing him. And in that glance, something inside him softened. Later that night, he found her on the porch wrapped in a blanket staring at the stars. You don't talk much about yourself, she said when he sat beside her. He smirked. Not much to tell. I don't believe that. He looked at the sky. After the fire, I stopped building anything, tables, chairs, plans, life. She didn't speak, just waited. I was afraid that if I made something again, it'd burn too. Lily's voice was quiet. And now? I'm thinking maybe it's not about what lasts, he said. Maybe it's about what you're willing to build anyway. When they came back inside, Lily paused by the window and looked at the small mound of soil where Sophie had planted the seed. Do you think it'll grow? She asked. Daniel looked out with her. I don't know, he said. But we gave it a place to try. She nodded. That night, when the house settled into its quiet breathing again, Daniel lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The wind outside was gentle, not haunting. For the first time in years, he wasn't just waiting for something to end. He was wondering what might begin. Sometimes the quiet isn't an absence. It's a space where something good can grow. The snow melted slower that week. Frost still clung to the edges of the porch roof, and the cabin exhaled its usual creaks like a body, long accustomed to winter. Inside, everything held a fragile warmth, a balance so quiet it felt like it could last. But shadows don't knock when they return. They slip in through silence. It started with tire tracks. Daniel saw them one morning while splitting wood. They weren't his. The pattern was wrong, more narrow, newer, not local. He followed the impressions through the soft snow, down the road a few hundred feet. They disappeared back onto the highway. Someone had driven up, then turned around. Maybe a hunter. Maybe a stranger passing through, or maybe someone looking. That night, Daniel double-checked the locks on every window. Lily noticed. Something wrong? She asked, handing him a dish towel. Just saw some fresh tracks out front, he said. Could be nothing. She froze for a second, then nodded. Could be. But her hands shook slightly when she reached for the water glass. The next day, a pickup rolled slow through town. Sheriff Heiress saw it from the bench outside the diner. The driver didn't stop, just looked too long at every house and drove on. Later that afternoon, Heiress pulled up to Daniel's cabin. Daniel met him on the porch. You expecting visitors? Heiress asked. Daniel shook his head. Why? Out-of-town truck came through. Idaho plates. No one we know. Daniel crossed his arms. Someone looking for trouble? Maybe. Just keep your eyes open. Lily didn't ask questions when Daniel added a latch to the back door that evening. But when Sophie went to bed, she stood by the fire, arms crossed, staring into the flames. "I think he found us," she said softly. Daniel looked up. "I never told him where I was going," she said. "But he has people, a way of tracking." "Has he hurt Sophie before?" Daniel asked. She shook her head. "Not physically, not yet. But if he's here, it won't be for a conversation." Daniel's jaw clenched. "He doesn't get to come near her." "He'll try. He always does." Daniel walked over and checked the window again. The woods were still, but quiet could lie. "If you want us to go," Lily said behind him. "I understand." He turned. "This is your home now, at least until you say otherwise." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded, blinking away something in her eyes. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. Every sound outside made him sit up straighter. Branches brushing glass, wind in the gutters. He kept a hammer near the nightstand and checked on the front door 3 times. At dawn, he brewed coffee and sat with his back to the wall, eyes on the window. Nothing came. 2 days passed. Then, on the 3rd, Sophie screamed. Daniel dropped his axe and ran. She stood at the edge of the woods behind the cabin, crying. Lily was already there, holding her. "He was there," Sophie sobbed. "In the trees, I saw him." Daniel moved fast. Tracks, boot prints, heavy, fresh. They led away from the cabin, not toward. He followed them until they disappeared into mud. When he returned, Lily stood at the door, her face white. "It's him," she said. "I know it." Daniel walked past her, into the shed. When he returned, he had a crowbar and a plan. That evening, they pulled the couch in front of the door and set Sophie's sleeping bag between the wood stove and wall. Lily didn't ask questions when Daniel handed her a flashlight and showed her where the rifle was kept, locked behind the pantry door. He sat in the chair all night, staring at the front window. Lily joined him just after midnight. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I know," Daniel replied. She sat down beside him. "You're not responsible for us." Daniel looked at her. "That's not how I see it." She didn't answer, just leaned her head on his shoulder. For a long time, they didn't move. But both of them listened. To the night, to the quiet, and to the promise tucked inside it. If the shadows had returned, they would not find them unguarded. Some storms return, but this time, someone is willing to stand at the door and say, "Not again." It started just after sunset. The cold had thickened into a weight, pressing against the windows like breath from something waiting outside. Sophie had gone to sleep early, exhausted by fear and too many hushed reassurances. Lily tucked her in on the floor by the stove, then joined Daniel in the living room where the fire had been reduced to glowing embers. Daniel had laid out tools on the table, hammer, flashlight, crowbar, and the rifle now unlocked from its case. Lily stared at the gun. "You really think he'll try something tonight?" "I think if someone's desperate enough to stalk a child through woods in winter," Daniel said, "they don't wait." She said nothing. Her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "I've seen what men like him do," Daniel added. "They don't ask. They take." Lily met his gaze. Her voice broke slightly. "Then don't let him take her." The knock came just after midnight. One knock, measured, deliberate. Daniel stood from his chair, rifle already in hand, heart pounding. Lily pulled Sophie tighter in her sleeping bag and whispered into her ear, her body blocking the child like a shield. Daniel walked to the door but didn't open it. "Who is it?" he called, a man's voice. Smooth. Confident. "I think you've got someone who belongs to me." Daniel's grip tightened. "You're not welcome here." "I'm not looking for trouble," the man said. "Just a conversation. A minute with Lily, then we'll be on our way." Daniel said nothing. Through the frosted glass he saw the silhouette. Tall, coat open, no gloves. "Look," the man added, "I can get the sheriff out here, but I'd rather not make a scene." That little girl's been through enough, hasn't she? Daniel spoke slowly, clearly. You make one move toward that child, and I swear to God, the man laughed low and mocking. You must think you're some kind of savior. I'm just someone who opens the door when it matters, Daniel said. Then, louder, leave. Now. Silence. Then the front window shattered. Daniel ducked, sweeping Lily and Sophie back. Glass sprayed across the floor like ice daggers. The shadow outside moved fast, circling toward the back. He's coming. In, Lily cried. Daniel shoved the couch aside and pulled Lily behind him. Get her into the bedroom, lock the door. Lily hesitated. Daniel, now, she ran. Daniel stood in the kitchen, eyes on the back door. The wind blew through the broken window. The cold felt alive. A boot crashed through the back door, splintering the frame. Then the man stepped through, face pale, eyes hard and familiar. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't panicked. He was calm in the way only the dangerously certain can be. She doesn't belong here, he said. She doesn't belong with you, Daniel replied, raising the rifle. The man stepped forward. Daniel didn't shoot. Not yet. The man reached into his coat. Daniel fired. The shot cracked through the cabin like thunder. The man dropped to his knees, clutching his shoulder, groaning in pain. I told you, Daniel said, his voice steady. You don't get to come near her again. Blood pooled slowly across the wood floor. Daniel walked forward, still aiming. She's not yours to fix, the man spat. I'm not here to fix her, Daniel said. I'm here to stand between her and whatever comes next. The man laughed, then passed out. Sheriff Heiress arrived 20 minutes later, headlights cutting through the cold dawn. Daniel sat on the porch steps, the rifle across his lap, eyes hollow. Inside, Lily held Sophie close, rocking slowly. The sheriff took Daniel's statement, looked at the man in the back seat of his cruiser, cuffed and moaning. Self-defense, Heiress said, clear as daylight. Daniel didn't answer. You all right? The sheriff asked. Daniel looked back toward the house. Not yet, he said, but we're getting there. That afternoon, the three of them sat near the fire, bundled in blankets. No one spoke much. Sophie reached out, touching Daniel's arm gently. Did you stop the bad man? She asked. Daniel nodded. She smiled. Thank you. Daniel swallowed hard. You're safe now. Lily took his hand. No words passed. They didn't need them. Because sometimes love is standing in front of the fire, with your heart pounding and your knees shaking and saying, if I lose everything again, so be it, because I won't lose you. Courage doesn't always look like battle cries. Sometimes it's just staying when every part of you remembers the cost of love. The morning after the storm felt stiller than it should have. The sky hung low with heavy gray clouds, and the snow that had started to melt now froze again, creating a crust over everything. Fragile, deceptive. Lily sat on the couch with Sophie tucked under her arm, the girl's breath warm against her ribs. She hadn't let go of her daughter since the night before. Daniel stood outside staring at the broken window. Shards of glass sparkled in the morning light like salt on an old wound. He boarded it up quietly, hands steady. It wasn't the first time he'd patched something ruined. But this felt different, more personal, like the cabin had bled with them. He didn't speak until Lily came out with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one and leaned against the porch post. I didn't know people like you still existed, she said softly. Daniel looked down at his boots. I didn't either. They tried to return to something like normal. Chopping wood, warming soup, reading to Sophie by the fire, but something had shifted in the air. An aftershock of danger. Not just fear. Grief, too. Even if they had won. The next evening, Daniel stayed up late in the shed, sanding the broken bench Sophie loved. The wood grain was smooth beneath his hands, familiar, safe, until the smell hit him. Smoke. He dropped the sander, ran. The cabin was glowing orange from within. By the time he reached the porch, fire had taken hold of the kitchen. Flames clawed the ceiling. The heat roared like something alive. "Sophie!" he shouted. From inside, Lily's voice. "We're in here!" He didn't hesitate. He threw his body through the door, the heat searing his face as smoke poured out. He found Lily near the stairs, cradling Sophie, both of them coughing. "This way," he barked, shielding them with his arms. Wood cracked overhead. A rafter fell behind him. Lily screamed. Daniel shoved them out the door, stumbling through smoke and snow. The cold air hit him like ice water, his lungs screaming. He collapsed on the ground beside them. Then the roof gave in. Flames shot high into the sky, licking the black sky like a signal flare to everything they had survived, and everything they had lost again. It took hours for the fire to die. The sheriff came, then the fire crew from 2 towns over. All they could do was contain it. Lily wrapped Sophie in Daniel's old coat, holding her tightly beside the fire truck. Her face was blank, hollow. Daniel stood with Heiress watching the ruin smolder. "I'm sorry," the sheriff said. "We'll find out how it started." Daniel nodded once, eyes never leaving the ruins, but he already knew. That night they stayed at Heiress's spare cabin down the road. Daniel couldn't sleep, neither could Lily. She found him outside, staring up at the dark sky. The air was biting, but neither moved. "We lost everything," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. It just broke apart. Daniel didn't look at her. "I've lost before. This time was different." "Yeah," he whispered. "It was." She stepped closer. "Why'd you come in after us?" He turned to face her. The porch light carved soft lines in his face, in the fresh burns on his forearms where the heat had reached him. "Because if I had to lose something," he said, "I wasn't going to let it be you." She stared at him, eyes wide and wet. He stepped forward, gently took her hand. "I've already lost my home once. But you and Sophie, you made it feel like I had one again." The wind picked up, brushing past them like memory. "I don't know how to start over," Lily whispered. Daniel squeezed her hand. "Then don't start over. Just start with me." In the distance, the embers glowed faintly. But dawn was already breaking over the trees, and the place that had burned wasn't. The only thing rising from ash. Some things burn, but not all of them die. Especially not hope. The ash still covered the hilltop like a bruise. From the road, the cabin looked like nothing more than a skeleton now. Blackened beams, collapsed roof, and scorched earth where a porch once held mourning. Coffee and quiet promises. Daniel stood at the edge of the clearing with a shovel in one hand, his breath rising in the cold. Lily was beside him, her coat zipped to her chin, one glove missing. Sophie clutched a paper cup of cocoa between both hands. None of them said much, because some ruins don't need words. They speak for themselves. By mid-morning, the first trucks rolled in. Sheriff Heiress showed up in an old flannel and work gloves. Behind him came Mrs. Elgin from the bakery, who brought a box of biscuits and a handwritten note that read, "For rebuilding, brick by brick, crumb by crumb." The town followed, in quiet waves. Bill Owens from the lumberyard, Tommy, the young mechanic, Ruth and Carol from the church with casseroles and more casseroles. No one asked what happened. No one needed to. They just showed up, with hammers and wood, with nails and saws and soup. Some offered tools, others cleared rubble. A few just stood quietly, their presence a kind of balm. It was the kind of grace that doesn't announce itself. It just gets to work. Daniel tried not to cry when he saw them lifting the new beams together. Tried and failed. He turned away, pretending to check the measurements of the foundation. But Lily saw. She walked to him slowly, touched his shoulder, and whispered, "Let them help you. You've carried enough alone," and he did. For the first time in years, he did. They rebuilt it slowly, with no rush, no deadlines, just hands and hours and care. Daniel spent days working beside Bill, sanding wood for the new porch posts. Lily painted the interior beams by hand, humming softly, her voice no longer cracked. Sophie planted daffodils by the fence line. They didn't try to recreate what had been lost. They created something new, something shaped by second chances. One afternoon, about a week later, Daniel found Lily on the front steps of the half-built porch, staring at the bare ground beneath the kitchen window. "Something missing?" he asked. She nodded. "The tree." Sophie walked up behind them, holding the tiny sapling Daniel had helped her choose at the nursery in town. "Can we plant it now?" she asked. Lily looked to Daniel. He smiled. "Let's do it." They knelt in the soil together. Sophie dug with small hands while Daniel carved out space for the roots. Lily lowered the tree into the earth. Together they pressed the soil down gently. Together they watered it. When they stood, Sophie looked up at them and whispered, "Promise, tree." Daniel blinked. "What's that?" "It means it stays," she said, "even when it rains." Lily reached down, brushed hair from her daughter's face and whispered, "Even when it burns." Daniel looked at them both, this woman and child who had walked into his life during a storm, and realized that every nail he'd driven into the new beams wasn't about a house. It was about staying, about choosing, about hands that come together, not because they're told to, but because they know what it is to lose and choose love anyway. That night, the new roof still unfinished, the three of them sat beneath the stars, wrapped in blankets, drinking warm cider from mismatched mugs. The sky was quiet, the wind gentle, and in the earth nearby, a tiny tree waited to grow. Sometimes healing isn't about forgetting. It's about rebuilding. Together, one hand at a time. Spring arrived in quiet footsteps. The snow had melted weeks ago, leaving behind soft soil and patches of wild grass that crept cautiously across the land like nature itself was testing the waters of return. Daffodils bloomed under the kitchen window, and the sapling Sophie planted, her promise tree, stood straighter now, a single green bud curled tightly at its tip. The cabin was complete, not perfect, but complete, and sometimes that's more sacred. Daniel stood at the edge of the porch, hammer in hand, attaching the final board to the railing. Behind him, the new roof caught the morning sun in streaks of gold. He paused to wipe sweat from his brow, then heard soft footsteps behind him. "You missed a nail," Lily said, holding a mug of coffee. Daniel grinned. "Testing you." She handed him the mug. Their fingers touched briefly, but neither pulled. Away. Inside, Sophie was coloring at the new kitchen table, a table Daniel had built from salvaged wood. Each leg slightly uneven, but it held steady, like him. Later that afternoon, the sheriff stopped by. Not for business, just to sit on the porch and listen to the birds. "Feels like a place again," he said, sipping sweet tea. Daniel nodded. "Feels like home." The sheriff looked at him for a long moment, then down at the tree by the window. "You planted it," he said. "We all did," Daniel replied. The sheriff stood. "She's lucky to have found you." "I think we found each other." The man clapped his shoulder and left without another word. Some things don't need saying. That evening, Sophie insisted on a picnic. They laid out a blanket on the grass behind the cabin. Lily brought warm bread, boiled eggs, a salad of greens. Sophie picked herself. Daniel brought a guitar he hadn't played since before the fire. His fingers were clumsy at first. But Sophie clapped along, and Lily hummed quietly. By the third song, he didn't notice the rust anymore. They laughed. They told stories. They watched, the stars rise like promises above the tree line. And when Sophie finally fell asleep on Lily's lap, Daniel leaned back on one elbow and looked at her, this woman whose strength was quiet, who had lost so much and still offered love like a hand extended. She looked back, and for a long time, they just breathed. "I never promised you forever," she said, almost a whisper. "I know. But I'm still here." He reached for her hand. "Let's choose it," he said. "Every day, until the choosing stops feeling like a question." She nodded, eyes shining in the firelight. "Then I choose today." The wind shifted gently through the trees. The leaves whispered secrets and forgiveness. In the corner of the yard, the promise tree swayed, small, fragile, but rooted, like them. Not everything that breaks stays broken. Some things, when cared for, when chosen, grow stronger from the crack. We don't always get to go back to what we had, but sometimes if we're lucky, we get to build something new where we choose to stay and love quietly, bravely again. Some stories don't end with a goodbye. They end with a choice. To stay, to protect, to love again, even after the fire. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that family isn't always blood, but the people who show up and choose you every day, then stay with us, like, subscribe, and keep the light on. Because healing takes time. And the next story might just be the one you've been waiting for.